Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted and privileged to welcome a very accomplished professional and author from Boston, USA, Donna Starr. Donna, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ash. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Donna is a published author, a certified executive coach, and a former senior VP of a global company. As I mentioned, she's an author, and all of you know I'm always very partial to authors. She's an author of a book titled Unsuccessfully Successful, and she specializes in helping high-performing corporate executives and audiences become more self-aware, empowered in their decision-making, and create sustainable changes from the inside and out. So, Donna, before we talk about your book and executive coaching, tell me a little bit about your own journey.
You know, I grew up in a very small town outside of Boston, and my older brother, this is important, my older brother was deemed a genius very early on, and my parents moved to a town just because of the school systems.
Wow.
So education was always a very, my parents placed an enormous amount of weight on education. So maybe you can relate to that.
Absolutely.
And so very driven. My brothers and I very driven. My dad was an entrepreneur. My mom was a bookkeeper, you know, very common at the time, and very driven. And my older brothers are very, very successful. I decided to go into advertising, which is not particularly high paying. I made it up all the way up the corporate ladder and loved every minute, but didn't have the right tools, I think, to manage home and life. There wasn't a lot of blueprints when I was growing up. And now I'm a coach because I realized there are many other ways to live your corporate career without killing yourself.
Amazing. Thank you. So let's talk about your book, Donna, Unsuccessfully Successful. Tell me a little bit about the book and what was your hypothesis when you wrote it?
What happened was when I became a coach, I hired a coach who told me that I should start doing emails. And he said, you should do 3 emails a week. I said, I just came out of corporate America. If I send 3 emails a week, I know I was buried in a sea of emails. So I decided to write every other week. And I really got positive feedback on my emails. A friend of mine who I'd met online said, oh, I'm writing a book. And I joined the program called Manuscripts. I highly recommend any of your viewers who are thinking of listeners who are thinking of writing a book to join that program through Georgetown University. It keeps you very accountable. Yeah. So I had already written all these essays, and so I put them together into writing a book about just my corporate journey as a single mom climbing the corporate ladder. So my hypothesis is it doesn't need to be as hard as we make it.
Fascinating. Fascinating. And what is the logic behind this interesting name, Unsuccessfully Successful?
It
and
is
what
a good
does it
name,
mean
right?
to you?
Well, it's funny because the book for the first 11 months was going to be called Silly, Say It Like It Is, which is my personal brand. And it kind of, and also just bringing more levity. So it was a double meaning. I do think we tend to take ourselves too seriously, you know? And then I had to write my bio in the third person, and I wrote Donna Starr was unsuccessfully successful. And my editor's like, I like that. And then for our next meeting, we met weekly, I said, I'm going to change my book title to Unsuccessfully Successful, which is you can have all the trappings of success, which I did, a high title, I made a lot of money, I traveled, I dressed well, but I never felt fully complete on the inside. I never felt in alignment with that I was where I was supposed to be, which doesn't mean I didn't have some joy along the way. I just never really felt I was where I was supposed to be. And that's the impetus behind Unsuccessfully Successful.
Fascinating. And tell me, what motivated you to explore the concept of success and its relationship with failure in your book?
Because I think failure is success, is taking risks. When you play it very safe, you're not going to have an Oreo cookie. You're not going to have you're not going to have something that didn't mean to happen. So I played it very well. I don't know if I would say I played it so safe because I'm a sort of a risk taker. But I think the meaning of success means you have to define it for yourself. So if a lot of people in the US, maybe India is slightly different, graduate college, maybe get an advanced degree, get your first job, stay there for 2.2 years, ask for a promotion. I think those societal norms are blown up at this point, and people, especially post-COVID, are deciding that they need to define success on their terms. And so I thought it was a timely title for a book because I think COVID shook up the world.
Correct. And did your perspective on success change or evolve as you were going through the writing process?
Yes, this is a really good question, Ash. I would say yes, because I had all the trappings of success, but success for me now means freedom. So I can get up and not have a lot of appointments, or I can book a lot of clients in one day, and I have much more freedom over my schedule than I ever had over my life, over somebody judging whether I was good or bad, right, wrong, good fit, bad fit. I get to decide all of that now.
Wonderful. Thank you. Can you also discuss any specific strategies or insights that you provide in your book for those striving for success?
Yes. So I coach a lot of men one-on-one. I also coach a lot of women sometimes in group settings. And there is this structure. I don't want to say more for women than men, but let's use that argument for today, where we don't feel like we have agency to say no if somebody asks us to do something, that we think we have to be all things to all people. So a lot of the work I do in coaching is deciding if that's really true. That if you don't bake cookies for the bake sale, does that make you less of a mother? No. If you decide that you're going to go home and have dinner with your family or shut your laptop if you're working remote, does that make you less of a good employee? And sometimes these small changes, I know they seem trite, a little bit trite, but it's those small changes that lead to bigger changes. Oh, I can shut my laptop Tuesday at 6:30 and go to an exercise class, and the world doesn't end. Oh, maybe I can do that twice a week. Oh, maybe I can start feeling better about myself if I go to a gym, you know, or whatever floats your boat, right? It doesn't have to be a workout class. So I think it's small steps that lead to larger changes. In the beginning, people are terrified of making those changes because they think there's a lot of worry about outside judgment. But when you start to feel better about yourself, hence the words inside out, then you bring a more confident person to work into your life. So that's a small.
Well said. Great response. Thank you. And do you believe there is a universal definition of success, or is it subjective and different for each individual?
Well, I think in Webster's dictionary, in Oxford, there's a definition of success. And I think that's what trips us up. I think everybody has to define that for themselves. If you want to be a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad, and that lights you up, that's success because you're doing what feels right to you. Make no mistake that I don't live in a utopian society that believes that you don't need to make money. But what I do believe is that you get to define how much money you need to live, and you don't have to, you know, I think the average, I took the course, I don't know if you've heard in India of Laurie Santos, the most popular course at Yale is Science of Wellbeing, or, you know, happiness. Over $75,000 US not an appreciable difference in happiness. So yes, I think people get to define what success means to them.
Well said. And did you encounter any unexpected or memorable reactions from readers since the book released?
I did. I made some mistakes, I'm not going to lie. About that. I had one chapter where I remembered something from 30 years ago and was not as delicate as I could have been, even though I had no names in the book. And I got some pretty negative, harsh reaction to the point where I actually changed the chapter. So don't be afraid to make mistakes, and don't be afraid to admit them, even though I probably can't repair that damage. And in other cases, I had a lot of people tell me they saw themselves in me. I have one chapter where I talk about, I used to dream about going into the hospital so I could rest during my corporate career, because I lived on planes, trains, automobiles. And I was surprised at how much reaction I got to that people felt the same way. Now, having been in the hospital recently with a family member, I can say there's actually no rest in a hospital because they wake you up like every 3 to 5 hours. But yes, I've gotten a lot of people really resonating with the book.
Fantastic. And one more question relating to your book, and then we'll talk coaching. What do you hope readers will take away from your book, Unsuccessfully Successful?
I think your questions have been great, by the way, that you get to determine what success means to you, that it doesn't have to be so hard. I share my stories. I share some of my client stories. And I know this will spill into a coaching question, but we have a lot of stories that narrate our head, like we ruminate and should I have done this differently? There are a lot of shoulds. And I know this will go into coaching, and I give you some tools to actually identify whether that's fact or fiction.
Fascinating. So let's talk about your avatar as an executive coach. You were just telling me that, you've come from a family where your brother was classified as a genius, and your dad was an entrepreneur, your mom was a bookkeeper, you yourself were pushing yourself. My first question is, how has your background supported your coaching philosophy, your style, and your values?
That's a big question, Ash.
It is.
Well, family is at the heart of everything that I do. So for me, it's family first. And the reason I think that I start there, because that's a value for me, that's a boundary for me. And I didn't always keep that boundary. And I'm very honest, I interview my children for the book. I think they both have a little post-traumatic stress from my corporate career, always on, especially with a global company. Is I watch for that in my coaching. How much are people tolerating or giving up of their family life to be successful, and what toll is that taking on them? By the way, if there's not a toll, then it doesn't matter. But I have very rarely seen that people are picking one over the other. And so I guess the answer to my question is it's everything to do with my coaching, because my core value is family first.
Well said. And my next question is, how have you been shaped by people in your life? All of us have, and you went right to the top in your corporate career. How are these people influencing you as a coach today?
I have a whole chapter in my book on mentorship. So I have been very lucky to be shaped by very strong, both male and females, that saw some potential in me and pushed me to get to the top of my profession. So I've been very shaped, and very differently. Very, very differently. One is more nurturing, and some others have been more tough love, and some others have been clients. I had one client from when I was pregnant with my first, who's still a mentor to me 30 years later. So I have been very guided by, so if your listeners are paying attention, what I would say is, if you don't have a mentor, find one. People want to mentor other people. They don't have to be within your company. They can be just people that you admire outside of out of work. And I think that is a guiding principle for me, is that I've always had strong mentors in my life.
Wonderful. And what would you say are some of your own unique perspectives that you bring into a coaching relationship?
Well, I was at the highest level of corporate America. And so I see the perspectives, not only from a coaching perspective, but from a political landscape. Corporate America is, even families, everything has a political aspect to it, a hierarchical culture. So I see those very clearly, because I'm not, of course, in the situation. So I bring my corporate experience. My clients were Fortune 500 companies like UPS, like CVS, and I'm able to really read the tea leaves very, very well. That's my experience. And then my coaching experience allows me to listen for what's not being said. So you may say, oh, everything's fine. And very rarely when somebody says, is everything fine? Is it fine? So I have the listening skills and the corporate skills and the intuition that I bring into my coaching engagements.
Well said. Great response. My next question, Donna, is on culture. And you live in an incredibly culturally diverse country. And, we all come from cultures, whether it's from the country that we come from, the family that we come from, the society that we live in. How does culture impact coaching?
Well, so if I'm doing my corporate, that's such a good question, by the way, but I would say from my corporate experience, culture is everything. So if you're the type of person that wants to go into a corporate culture and change the world, and the culture is much more patient, then you're probably not talking about fit. So when I say that I have my corporate experience and that I'm highly intuitive, I can tell whether there's some rub just by the way people respond to the experiences around them. So my job in coaching is to highlight some other perspectives. What else might be going on here? There's your version of what's going on. And then let's just explore. A lot of people, when they come to coaching, are stuck, as you know, and they're very fixed in their perspective. That doesn't win the battle. Being right is highly overrated.
Correct.
So I try to give people additional tools and perspectives to see the larger landscape.
Wonderful. So I have time for two more questions. My next question is on the younger generation, the millennials and the Gen Zs who have now got into leaders of authority in the corporate sector. And I've often said that, the millennials and the Gen Zs bring in a breath of fresh air, and hopefully they will sort out the problems that my generation has created in the world. As a coach, I'd love to get your perspective on what areas do the young leaders need to be coached in?
Being smart is only one tool, it's only one tool in the toolkit. So I've seen a lot of millennials come in and be the smartest people in the room. And that's the easy part. It's reading the room, being respectful to the other people in the room, being open to other ways of thinking. And so I'm not, and by the way, a veteran, a boomer, a Gen X, I would give the same feedback, but specifically for the younger generation, as you lead, realize that you're on the backs of the people that led before you. And that change takes time, and be respectful. You will get so much more out of being respectful versus being right.
Correct.
So.
Well said. Well said. And my last question to Donna, and this is for the thousands of people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your own amazing journey as a corporate leader, as a coach, as an author, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want a lot of our young viewers and listeners to take away?
3 lessons. Okay. One is celebrate your success. Right. So if you get, and one of the things I do in coaching is have my leaders, before they get on our sessions, tell me something they're proud of themselves for, because we live in a very driven culture and sometimes we forget to celebrate along the way. So stop and so that's 1, celebrate your success. 2, take a pause. Not everything has to be on 0 to 100 all the time. And when you lead and you show that you can pause and reflect, it's really a great tool for your teams too, to realize they don't have to always be on. So that whole respond versus react, don't send the email right away. Take a minute before you send it something emotional or say something emotional. So 1 is to celebrate, 2 is to pause, and 3 is to acknowledge your mistakes. It's okay. It's okay, because not only do we want to encourage them, we don't want to cover them up, because that's when our true learning happens.
Fascinating. And on that note, Donna, and your 3 amazing lessons, celebrate your success, take a pause, and acknowledge mistakes. Thank you so much for speaking to me about your journey. Thank you for speaking to me about your book, Unsuccessfully Successful. Thank you also for speaking to me about so many different aspects of coaching. Thank you again, and good luck.
Thank you so much for having me on today.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast. platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.